Welcome to Two Teachers and a Table. We are your hosts, Mr. Ripka and Mr. Bergman. Today the topic of discussion is Machiavelli, both the person and the term. Machiavelli, of course, is famous for having written the political treatise The Prince in 1513, though it wasn't published until 1532. During his time in the 1500s, Machiavelli was known as an author of histories, poems, and plays. He, of course, was a statesman also, but only later did he become known as a political theorist or political philosopher. And even later, his name has become synonymous with diabolical cunning. And so from there, I'd like to ask Mr. Bergman the sort of general question about Machiavelli, and that is Machiavelli evil?
That's a very general way of speaking about who Machiavelli was. You have to look, though, at Machiavelli as far as history is concerned, as far as the press he was given by his contemporaries, and to how we interpret the term Machiavellian, whether we're referring to it as a political manipulation or a psychological disorder. Machiavelli, a lot of what we initially heard about Machiavelli came from the Medici, speaking about him. And of course, because he was considered a traitor when they were coming back into Florence.
He was exiled.
Right, he was exiled, put into prison, tortured.
Oh, wow.
And so the general reputation, if you lived in Florence after the Medici had retaken it, to say anything good about Machiavelli meant that you were an enemy, because Machiavelli was associated with being a traitor, and it had nothing to do with the prince at that time.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, what the problem was with Machiavelli at the time was the person.
Right,
the
exactly.
fact that he was an enemy of the state.
Exactly.
Not because of his ideas.
Right. Right, because his book became more popular post-mortem. Not during his lifetime at all, and you can tell the date 1532. I believe he had even passed away.
It was a posthumously published book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now the other way that we get the reputation is because the word manipulation is associated with him because of the prince. However, you have to look at what that manipulation means. It's not a personal. It's not a personal mechanics that he's looking at instilling. It's a professional mechanic.
Could we stop there for a second? So by personal versus professional, we mean exactly.
When you manipulate somebody for personal gain, that's where you're really using people. But if you're doing it for professional or political gain, you're doing it to further a cause that may not only be your own cause, but may be the general cause that is shared by a lot of people in the society in which you live.
And I see. And the work, The Prince, was dedicated to a prince.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely, yes.
I don't think he received the work, or at least it wasn't published, as we're saying, until after Machiavelli died. But it was a work that was dedicated to a prince to help the prince learn how to rule. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And part of that, too, has to do with the fact the prince that he addresses is an absolute monarch.
Oh, okay.
You're not talking about working with a parliament necessarily. I mean, it could be used. The methods in his book could be used that way.
I definitely do want to talk about that at some point today.
But I think what's most interesting is, politically, to motivate people, you have to use a certain amount of manipulation to put everybody on the same page. Not everybody who is working for you or who you delegate work to is going to be motivated unless you use some kind of manipulation.
So why is this book so shocking, if that's the right word, to our modern
Well, in our modern
sentiments?
sense, because the term Machiavellian was adapted by psychology, and it refers to a person who is manipulative to a fault.
And you're talking about, once again, I think as you said earlier, a sort of personal use of it, not a political use of it.
Right, and technically, if you look at it, the term used as a psychological term in psychiatry, I mean, it refers to a psychopath. It's somebody who manipulates completely for personal gain, and they do not care what happens to the people they use, and that would include the death of people. To use somebody to the point where you can ruin their lives. And personally, you're a psychopath because personally you have no remorse for what you did, and Machiavelli does not purport any of that.
What could we, for just to inform the audience, could we state perhaps what he is informing the prince to do? That is, on a political level, just what he says in the prince itself that is supposed to help this prince rule.
Well, speaking generally, what helps the prince rule is, first of all, understanding the underlings that to whom he's delegating any kind of work. How do you motivate them? He says to do what you have to keep power. So if part of that manipulation means threatening or somehow instilling fear, that's do what's necessary, but that's not his major recommendation.
No.
The major recommendation would be to somehow or other appeal to how those people are going to respond.
It sounds to me like what he's also suggesting is that he somehow understands human nature. Would you agree with that? That
yes.
or at least he has a definition or an idea of what he thinks human nature is. Mm-hmm. And do you have any thoughts of what that is at all? Like what his idea of what human nature is, so that he can manipulate it or whatever?
Right. Well, one thing that he considers is when you're in power, you always have somebody under you that wants that power.
Oh.
And you definitely see that in any political arena. I mean, you look at our own country. I mean, we're not talking about monarchs, but we're talking about a party in power. Whichever party is in power, and their whole goal is to stay in power or to get in power if they're not in power. And you do what you have to do to get in power. And unfortunately, in politics, that can involve dishonesty, deception, and very negative ways of getting what you want. But there's also positive ways to manipulate people, by using a certain amount of praise.
Bribery.
Bribery, or making people believe that they're doing better than they are, or that they're doing more than what they are, or are very valuable to you, even though they may not be. Yeah. So you get as much out of them as you possibly can.
It seems like when I think back of Plato's Republic and Aristotle's Politics, the sort of two great ancient works of political philosophy, that they define virtue in a certain way, mm-hmm. and they are aiming for a sort of utopian society in which the philosopher kings are virtuous people who strive for justice. And then here comes this treatise, The Prince, and it seems not to be saying that. Instead, is he redefining virtue then? Like, I guess what I'm asking, is there a virtue for Machiavelli for the prince or for the leader, and then there are other virtues for the peasants and the people?
No, he's defining reality.
He's defining reality.
We all want to be that virtuous, if we're in power, that virtuous person who rules, completely by principles and, with absolutely no corruption, no manipulation, no punishment. But that's not real politic. In real politic, that's an ideal. And we look at past. If you look at past leaders, presidents of the United States, Abraham Lincoln is this virtuous person. But we know in doing research, he manipulated. He had his faults.
He suspended habeas corpus.
Right. There you go. Exactly. And, naturally, a president has that right in the time of national emergency. But was it fair, to the people? So, we have the exact same thing.
But it's funny because you say that he has a president or a leader has the right to do these sorts of things. So it almost does sound like what we're suggesting is that leaders do live by a different virtue.
Yeah.
Or at least a different code of virtue than the peasants. I keep saying peasants, but I mean that the citizens have to live by. If the ruler, as you're saying, wants to keep rule and keep the rule organized and rule well.
And how do they want to be remembered? That's the whole thing, because you have, the rulers that we universally consider good, and other people we universally like. Hitler will never be considered good, no matter what. If you found 10 good things that he did, he's not remembered as good.
Did he use Machiavellian tactics?
No, I wouldn't say he did as much as a ruler like Elizabeth I.
Could you explain that?
Who was who was well remembered and well revered, even though her role was, very self-centered. I mean, she became almost a cult figure in her country. I mean, she represented her church. She represented a goddess of her country. People followed her. She represented England. Nationalism was tied up in her image.
So is let me understand, I'm really curious about it. Does Machiavellianism then mean that the image must be given off that you're a good person?
It should be, but
it doesn't have to be. But that'd be the ideal way.
Right.
That is the image you give off to the citizens, is that you are a virtuous, good person. But what you're doing behind the scenes is what you need to do to get the job done, to stay in power. And if we come back to Hitler for a second, Hitler didn't present himself, as we're saying, as a good person. He was just kind of like, we're going out there and we're taking over.
He attempted, or his propaganda machine did that. There are pictures of him with children. And,
so he did attempt that.
Yeah, and doing positive, petting his dogs or whatever. And, it's trying to make him look like, an everyday Joe or whatever. But we just know too much behind the scenes, that, what he really represented or what his government ended up representing. So, there's no redeeming quality. I mean, if you went back to Elizabeth I, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people were executed under her reign. She didn't tolerate, she came across as tolerant because of the Elizabeth settlement. It looks like religious equality.
I do remember that from my readings of Machiavelli as a student, that one thing that he does promote is that if there are factions in the society, the best thing to do is just eliminate them. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. I mean, just eliminate them, and by any means possible, get rid of the faction. And that seems like what perhaps Elizabeth I was doing. But what is different about Hitler, perhaps, I don't know, maybe you would be able to correct me if I'm wrong, is that Hitler not only had his Germany, but he was trying to take over more and more and conquer. I don't know if I remember that even being talked about in The Prince, about expanding your empire, like the Roman Empire, or like what Germany tried to do.
That's the way he did it, again.
It's good the way, but I was wondering, is The Prince more about keeping what you have as opposed to expanding and conquering and conquering?
I wouldn't say that it limits anything, depending upon who's reading it and how they interpret it. In his day, the empires were limited when you came right down to it. And you had the Habsburg Empire, which achieved expansion through marriages. Not through military takeovers or political alliances like Hitler arranged that weren't necessarily fair or right or honored, whatever. I think too, when you talk about Hitler, he didn't do anything behind the scenes. Everything was sort of out front. People saw what he was doing; they knew exactly what he was doing, and they were appeasing him as a result. If you go back to Elizabeth I again, you had a lot of people, for instance, when Catholic factions were rising against her with the possibility of, assassinating her, all that was kept hush-hush. Who was arrested, what was going on, people were, spirited away, taken to dungeons, they were tortured to give more information, etc. Unlike Mary I, who, all that was right out front. And I'm going to make you an example. And Hitler sort of did the same thing. Right. He put it out there, everything that he was doing that wasn't good was seen very early on.
I see. So
image is everything in Machiavelli.
That's what I was going to ask. That he would say that it is fine for a prince to lie to his people, As long as
Yes.
it's keeping the people safe, or it's keeping the people in check, or
keeping the republic, or the kingdom, whatever you're ruling, whatever keeps it together.
if it keeps it together, it's okay for the ruler to almost do anything.
Yeah, well, because it's ultimately going to be good for the people who live in the ruler society, and hopefully.
I mean, I wonder, how if the citizens would prefer transparency is a word thrown around all the time these days, right? And everybody's trying to be transparent, but
And again, and be virtuous and transparent.
And so it's so funny because the word itself is used almost, I think, in a Machiavellian way, because they're like, we're going to be transparent, but really there's lies in their transparency, right? They're only going to be transparent about the things that they want to be transparent about, and even those things are kind of hidden so that it comes off as, hey, I'm being all open about this, but everybody knows they're the farthest from transparent.
Yeah, it's gotten to the point now where when we have political manipulation like that, they don't even hide it anymore. This is a trick that we pulled, and we're just you're onto us. You know what we're doing, but we're just going to do it anyway.
It's almost shameless, but at the same time, it's almost like I don't even know what I'm trying to say, except that I wonder if I almost prefer that. Instead of trying to fake and hide it, it's like, listen, I'm using this Machiavellian technique, and I'm throwing it out there. But they seem proud.
Well, there's something, though, to be said for a sense of professionalism that comes with the image. That when you don't have that professionalism or that carriage, you lose something.
I see dignity.
You lose a professional respect, a maturity. Yeah. Otherwise you just end up looking like a child a willful child who just
some
does things to
petulant
spite
child.
people.
Yeah, I could see it. So is Machiavelli suggesting here that the means justify the ends?
Oh, absolutely. Matter of fact, most people draw that conclusion as if you teach Machiavelli, the Prince, that every student puts that in their summary. The ends justifies the means, and a ruler once again does not have to be particularly virtuous. They don't have to be particularly kind. They don't have to have good qualities, as long as what they're doing keeps them in power.
Keeps them in power. What about, I'd like to move it over from the power element to how this book can be used by teachers, CEOs, or other people that have to worry about not necessarily staying in power, but ruling in a way. Is this a book you would recommend to, let's go with teachers?
You could up to a point, absolutely. I mean, definitely the management of students. You want to motivate. I mean, you're in a position of authority, and you want to motivate to people who are not in that same authority. But hopefully, as a teacher, though, you take a more personal interest in how you're manipulated. And for instance, you don't compliment a student's accomplishments. It's like if they have a number of shortcomings in what they're doing, you don't zero in on that one accomplishment because it will benefit you. You do it because it will benefit them. It'll give them a certain amount of confidence, then they can work on the other things.
I see.
And you have to make that clear. It doesn't. It may make your job easier. That way, when you have students they become more involved or whatever, but in the long run, they benefit too. In Machiavelli, those people that you manage don't have to receive any kind of benefit whatsoever.
Not even having a republic that lasts.
No, yeah.
Like, hey, the republic is continuing to work. Therefore, you're still citizens of this republic. So, in a way, you're benefiting by continuing to be a part of this society.
Right. But yeah, you can be cogs in a wheel in a Machiavellian-run society. You can also, but a business could benefit from it if you have employees who are as ambitious as the CEO.
Oh yeah.
Because they have the opportunity to be in power, to be in that position.
It almost starting to remind me now of like mafia
Yeah.
type stuff, where like the mafia leader has to worry about the person under him,
yeah.
and maybe using these
And
these
look
Machiavellian techniques to
Yeah,
stay in
I mean,
power.
and look how many bosses, they have that employee who could really, if they have bosses over them, they have that other employee that can get that attention and replace that person very easily, and that may be their goal.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen it happen when I worked in business all the time, all the time.
Yeah. It's almost easier when you're not in power because you can start saying things about the leader.
Right.
And getting a faction or a group together, But then once you become the leader, it's like a Roman emperor. You have to start worrying about the next guy that's going to do that to you.
Exactly.
And it becomes a sort of cycle.
And that's what Machiavelli is trying to, and it's funny you just talk about mafia. I mean, if you lived in Italy at that time, the Medici, the Borgia, they were mafia families. They seriously, their power, they were ruthless in how they gained power. Even petty in how they gained power and maintained power. That no infraction went unpunished because we are an authority in every single way. And that's how they managed to keep power.
Do you remember that one line of the Prince? I don't have it verbatim, but it was that a good leader should be like a lion and a fox. Mm-hmm. How do you understand that right there? That to be both a lion and a fox makes a good leader.
Well, the lion has ultimate power and instills fear.
Okay, so we have
or
fear.
Respect. Whereas the fox is the tricky one.
Okay.
The manipulative one, the one that gets you to do things that you normally wouldn't do.
And some leaders are just lions, and some leaders are just foxes. But Machiavelli is saying the leader that can possess both the qualities of the fox and the lion will be the leader that maybe stays a leader, which is once again his goal, right? That once I think the beginning of his book or his treatise is how do you get the power? But I think most of the book really discusses how do you maintain that power, how do you keep the power once you have it, as we're talking about with mafia members, CEO members, even teachers, right? Well, you're given the power, kind of, to be in front of the class, but then you have to keep that power in a way, the classroom management, the respect that you have for the students have for you. But for political leaders, definitely, how do you keep the power, right? But it's funny because in the United States, we don't have to really worry too much about keeping the power. You get into power. It's really about getting the power, becoming a president. I think you got to worry about doing that again 4 years later. Yeah. But then that's it, right? I mean, outside of one president,
it's the party competition.
Okay.
Is the power? I mean, there's an expression, a legitimate expression in American politics: "Throw the rascals out," which is what one party is always trying to do to the other party. So you may be a president in power, but during the midterm elections, you suddenly have a Congress that's populated by the other party. Then you're not maintaining power necessarily. You have the power that the Constitution's giving you, but the day-to-day power may be slipping away because of Congress's power.
So if we come back to our original question, is Machiavelli evil? It sounds like what we're saying is, well, the man himself is not evil. And even historically, he was known to be a stand-up person. He was a good father, a good husband, a good citizen even.
Very
a statesman.
Civic conscious.
Yeah, very civically conscious. So it sounds like definitely what we're saying is that Machiavelli himself is not an evil person here. And the term itself is not even, I guess, always used in this negative way. But you are saying that when it's used psychologically, it has negative connotations.
Right, which means something entirely different. Psychologists simply use that because of the manipulation that comes behind the book. They just use it as a term, like we use any type of term, like a psychological term,
like a narcissist,
or
something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, narcissist. When you talk about any kind of ego situation,
egocentric person or whatever. What does an individual who is, to use the term psychologically, who is Machiavellian, how does he act exactly? Like, how does he treat others?
Machiavellian?
Yeah,
Well,
if he's a Machiavellian, psychologically speaking, not a
Well,
not a politician,
yeah,
not a
psychologically
politician.
speaking, he abuses people.
He lies.
Yeah, right. And lying, setting other people up for a fall. To
Spreads rumors.
Yeah, yes. And even to the point where, like I said, they have people who have been diagnosed as Machiavellian have murdered people to get them out of the way.
To get them out of the way. And it's not because, is it, well, I guess I'm asking, is it because I don't like you, so I'm getting rid of you? Or is it that I want to keep my power, and I feel like you're starting to encroach on my power, and so I'm getting rid of you? I mean, is it a personal attack on that one human being because that person annoys me?
Well,
or is
no,
it
that person will keep me from doing what I want to do.
So that person's in my way.
Right.
And
Like
so
you hear,
I see.
if you watch these shows that come on and these mysteries that's regularly reported by various networks. And so they'll have a story. It's almost always where a husband has killed a wife.
That's Machiavellian.
Right, and then they go through. Yeah, technically they could be because they didn't kill the wife because they were tired of her or because there was another woman on the side or whatever. It was to get insurance money, to take over a business. Because I saw one, it was a husband and a wife who ran a business together, and they both had different ideas. Because they owned the business together, the male partner couldn't do what he wanted to do with the business, so he bumped off the wife, and suddenly he became the sole CEO and took it in the direction where he wanted. That would be the psychological negative Machiavellian.
I wonder if we can go back to mini murders and think of that, like Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome, or Cain and Abel, or these sort of knocking these people off.
Somebody wants to get rid of somebody because they're standing in their way.
Yeah.
And it's got nothing to do with petty jealousy or anger. Mm-hmm. It's calculated. Yeah. You're keeping me from doing what I want. I think when you hear about murders like the Menendez brothers is a perfect example. Whatever they wanted to do, and I believe that they wanted the family fortune and the house and all to themselves. And how do you achieve those things? Well, these people are standing in my way. I could inherit this one day, but I can't wait for my parents to die.
It kind of just almost reminds me of not Monica Lewinsky. I'm sorry, but Tanya Harding. Thank you, Tanya Harding, who her people took out the other ice skater in what was that, the 80s or 90s, I think.
Or 90s, yeah.
It was early 90s. It took out the ice skater, right, so that she could go and continue to skate. That'd be a Machiavellian move. Yes. Perhaps Tanya, or perhaps Monica Lewinsky too. Who knows? Right. I mean, perhaps there's some Machiavellian things going on there to hush up things and cover things up.
Right. Yeah, definitely the Tanya Harding thing can be interpreted that way. So that's where the negative connotation comes from. But I just wanted to say in general that I don't like, when it comes to the political idea or the historical idea of Machiavelli, I never like to see positive or value system put on those things. They are what they are. Politics is politics. It can be a good thing or a bad thing depending upon the results. History can be, it happened.
It sounds like what we're saying also is that you use the word realpolitik, but it sounds like what we're saying is what Machiavelli is saying is, I'm not telling you how you should act or how you to do this or that. What I'm telling you is the reality of the situation. If you want to keep your power, this is what you have to do.
Right.
And it's almost suggesting if you want to become a ruler, there's certain sort of ethical codes that you hold tightly that if you want to keep ruling, you may have to let go of.
Right. And also the benefits that you may want out of that. I mean, it's great if, like Elizabeth I, if you can have a population that you feel loves you. But if they don't, that's fine too, according to Machiavelli.
Excellent. Well, I think that about wraps up our discussion for today about Machiavelli and his great treatise, The Prince. Next week, we'll have a guest, Mr. Thompson, and he'll be here to talk about the Federalist Papers, which is great having just talked about Machiavelli, because we'll be talking about Federalist 10, in which the authors sort of answer the question, what do we do with the factions that we have in our republic. And of course, Machiavelli would say, let's just get rid of them. But I think our founding fathers have a different answer for that.
Hopefully.
Yes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.